What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? We hope you're curious, my friends, because we've got Stay Curious, my friends, with us here today. He's a great guest, a personal friend I've never met, Mr. Brandon Fibbs. We became mutuals on TikTok long ago. I think this was one of my first mutual thruples online. Brandon and another one of his personal friends that he knows in real life that also creates content, and they just kind of roped me into they had a thing on Facebook, one of the message groups that says Jordan gets hijacked, or we kidnapped Jordan or something, and that's pretty much what it was. I couldn't get out of my every day was long conversations with them for a good while, and then Brandon, who has been
long audio conversations. We forced Jordan into
it's the
audio
worst.
Wow,
conversations.
talking to people in real
Sending
time.
audio
It was
messages back and
horrible.
forth.
Terrible.
Yeah. Sometimes videos.
Yeah, it was rough, but it was worth it because Brandon is an amazing person, and he has now been my tour guide on basically my virtual tour guide on basically every vacation I've taken since, because he's been in the words of Johnny Cash, he's been everywhere, man. You might know him from his social media presence on TikTok, where he gives us really cool, interesting facts. His "Stay Curious, my friends" is his tagline and his username on there. He's also got an awesome podcast called Wiki Surfer, where he goes down ADHD rabbit holes on Wikipedia and puts them in story form on podcast. It's great. You should check that out. He's been a producer. He's a big Hollywood guy too. Been a producer for the Through the Wormhole and the Story of God himself, Mr. with Morgan Freeman.
I did love that series, Through the Wormhole. Really great series.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That's a lot of fun, mind-bending stuff for sure.
You also worked on Dr. Pimple Popper, I saw on there, which won't give you too much of a hard time for.
No, I see that you've been to my IMDb profile. No, I did not, in fact, work on Pimple Popper. I'm not sure who accidentally got me on there, but I did work for that production company. So someone somewhere.
I was a little surprised. I was like, "Wow, Brandon, I don't know." I was like, "I'll give you a pass," because it also says that you gave some help on Cosmos and Ted.
Oh yeah, I worked on Cosmos, Space-Time Odyssey the entire time. Yeah, I worked on that,
and that's an incredible show. Like one of the.
And then yes, while I was working on that, sorry, we have a delay. While I was working on that, Seth MacFarlane was also making TED. So I would literally get up from these table reads in which we're talking about black holes and quasars, and I'd walk on down to refill my coffee and look in the room, and there's Seth in a mocap suit, like humping a cash register or something like that. And then like, oh, that's interesting. And go back and go do some more black hole talk. So yeah, I got wrangled into helping out with some stuff on TED and A Million Ways to Die in the West.
Oh,
what a time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's a good guy.
You also did a really super cool podcast, 9 Days in July, about the Apollo 11 missions, where it's literally each episode is one day on the mission. So it's a 9-episode series right now, or each, and that was some pretty incredible stuff as well. So who gets to because I saw in your IMDb bio that despite all the interesting stuff you've done in your life, because you've also been a Navy airman who you hunted submarines, right?
I did. Yeah, I always tell people I was a combination of Jonesy from The Hunt for Red October and Goose from Top Gun. But I just hunted the submarines from an airplane.
Definitely a pretty incredible job. And then you were in the seminary as well for a while. You interned on Capitol Hill. But it said in your bio on IMDb that when you grow up you want to be a scientist. And I was curious, who gets to write those bios? Did you get to do that, or did somebody do that for you?
It's a little mix of both, I think. It may have been cut and pasted for, you know what, it's been so many years, I have no idea. But I have often said that if I were to go back in time, I would study science. That time has passed. And because all of my time and energies and stuff have gone into film and television production, then I want to go find the best sort of science and history type stories and present those. Like I hope to do in my normal work life what I'm doing on TikTok, which is finding the best sort of like brain exploding science and history stories and use that as a way to bolster the great things that are being done in
or
science.
some sciencey facts that boggle your mind.
Yeah, the sciencey facts of
Sciencey facts that boggle my mind.
every once in a while we step on each other's toes with that series, and I'll do just story times on American history and whatnot. I remember you got mad because I got to the how the Eiffel Tower was sold story.
I know. I still haven't presented that yet because I was like, I got to give enough time and distance, or else everyone's
Well,
gonna think
I
I'm
think it's
stealing
been
from Jordan.
been probably 2 years now, or pretty close to, since I did that one. So I think you're good. You're in the
It's
clear.
time.
But anyway, so obviously, as interesting and as storied as your career has been, our podcast has a theme, and it doesn't have a whole lot to do with TV and movies.
Well,
has
the new Civil War movie, it might.
bye.
I want to go see it. Kind of is related to that, but
is this another Avengers thing, or
no,
oh,
it's like it's a fictional Civil War.
I am
Do you
the
not know,
least
Jordan?
like socially up to date person on the planet.
It's the new Alex Garland film, and he's basically looking at America in the midst of a civil war through the eyes of combat photographers and correspondents, war correspondents. And it's making people mad also because it doesn't explain how the Civil War started or why the nation has become divided, which is, I think, from the aspect of the filmmakers, a very smart tact to take. Because it allows you to overlay whatever your assumptions are, regardless of what side of those assumptions you're on. But yeah, it's freaking people out because people are like, this a couple years ago, this would have been science fiction, and now
I had kind of looked into it a bunch before, like 6 months ago, and when I first saw that it was very much a like fictional civil war, as in like the boundaries or like the borders of the different factions were very much like non-traditional and wouldn't make sense in an actual societal breakdown that we would perceive it today, which I agreed with in their choice to do that because, as the commenter pointed out in the video I was watching, it would be a little bit too uncanny and just kind of weird if it was a very reality-based civil war and you just took the themes that exist today in the political arena and then just made a movie out of it. Like, that just feels a little brash and not as much like a movie. I mean, obviously you could make a movie out of that, but not something that I think that has as much artistic value to it. And I'm interested to watch this because I think it probably will have some discussions and some social themes that kind of make you think a little bit more introspectively than just making a movie about an American Civil War. At least I hope so.
Well said. Agreed.
Well, anyway,
I'm a huge movie guy, so
yeah, no. I like movies. I'm just I get a lot of my movie information from Brandon's Facebook post because he posts about movies a lot for some reason. I don't know why he would be doing that. But
I gotta pay for that grad school education at NYU somehow.
Isn't NYU, is that only undergrad that's free right now?
I don't believe so. NYU is the most expensive private college in the nation. And when I applied to grad school, I got into pretty much everything I applied for, all of whom were giving me like some pretty substantial grants, except NYU, and that's the one I chose to go to. So I am happy to report that I just finished paying off my grad school loans.
Congratulations.
Just a couple months ago, and light at the end of the tunnel.
Well,
they do have free first year undergraduate tuition only if you meet certain financial criteria.
Yeah, so, but he was talking about grad school.
No, I get that.
Anyway, so your background, you've come a long way from where you started. Speaking of your college days, you were probably would have been a lot less
Mm.
willing to come on our show back then than you are today. You have a bit of a conservative background. You went to seminary school, correct? And then obviously military and Navy veteran, which tends to lean more conservative. And you've shared this story with me, but obviously I don't want to tell your story. So you just want to walk us through like where you've been and how you got here from, probably more of a Reagan Republican to being on our Bleeding Heart Liberal podcast.
Whoa. I take offense in liberal terminology.
Progressive.
Yeah, thank you.
That my first political memory is watching Reagan's inauguration because I'm one of those apathetic Xers. So I actually do have a memory of watching Reagan's inauguration. Obviously, I was this big, but I do remember it. I am the son and grandson of ministers. My family founded one of the largest Pentecostal Bible colleges in the country in Dallas, Texas, which I attended. I have always and then I saw myself going into politics. For the longest time I thought I was going to become a Christian conservative reformer, sort of the very people that now chill my blood and make me want to throw my TV out the window or hit it with a hammer. I almost became one of those people. 35 years of my life, 35 years as a believer. I'm no longer religious. I am an atheist. But that came after 35 years of being a devout Christian. And the thing, politically speaking, the thing that started to it was in the Navy. It's ironic that you say that, and you're absolutely right about like the military being a more conservative sort of organization. That's true. There were plenty of liberals and progressives that I knew while I was in it, but or who are definitely now more so since they got out. But it was in the military of all things where I started first questioning a lot of my political ideology. For whatever reason, I was like, wait a second, there might be something to gun control. And the death penalty and a number of things that I just started spending a lot of my free time looking into and examining and reading up on. And I filled binders full of things that I printed off and I was highlighting, and it was, and I came to I changed my mind radically on a number of things. And then 9/11, I was getting out of the military. That was the week I got out of the military. And you can't out-process from the military on a foreign base. You have to come back stateside. And I'd been spending the last 3 years in Italy. And so they said, where do you want to go for this out-processing? And I said, DC, because I'd done a congressional internship and on Capitol Hill. I was like, I want to go back to DC, and I love DC and see my friends. And so I was right over by the Pentagon when it got hit on 9/11. And the only reason that they let me out of the military is because my job was to track submarines, and there was
not a whole lot of
reasons
Afghanistan.
they could have kept me in, and there were reasons I thought I might want to stay in. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of reason for that. I will say that after that, I kept my uniforms in a box underneath my bed because I kept thinking there's going to be a call, like I'm going to get you have to come back, which is something the military can do.
Stop-gapping kind
of. And but the response, the U.S. response of turning everything that happened into 9/11 into Iraq, and we don't need to go into all the details. Everyone knows what I'm talking about, just how Bush turned this into a whole shock and awe campaign going after Saddam Hussein and fixing everything his daddy couldn't fix and stuff like that. That was like the straw that broke the political camel's back. And then I just started cascading away from that in ways that now Brandon at 50, gulp, who is like a progressive atheist compared to Brandon just 20 years ago, who was an a arch conservative, ultra religious person. I wouldn't even recognize myself. I would have a hard time being. I have plenty of conservative religious friends. I'm not saying that, but like they're not the kind of I wouldn't be the sort of person I would have been hanging out with on a regular basis. That's for sure. And I'd probably be very frustrated with myself.
That is crazy. I also need to know what the secret is to you looking, mid-30s and having gone through this transformation at 35, 20 years ago.
I don't know about that. I was looking at the beard. Look at this.
Yeah, you're coming in a little extra blurry. I think that's why.
Hair's falling off.
All that's happening to me too, and I'm 33, so I don't know. Guess
maybe it was all those years, those first like 35 years of good
Right.
Christian
Uh,
living before it was like, grabbing a
Good,
beer
honest,
and doing a
clean
podcast.
Christian living. Before the atheism got a hold of you.
Yeah, right.
well,
Yeah.
that is, I mean, every time I hear the stories of your life and like from your past, and it's just like it's so much crammed into such a I mean, you're definitely older than you look, but still such a short period of time. I mean, the fact that all of the jobs you've done, which are big things, like being a film critic and an active duty Navy vet, and living through 9/11 in DC, and being going to seminary school and becoming an atheist, and it's like all of these would be one timeline, one story in itself, and you've managed to cram 50 people's lives into one life, and you've been all over the world. He humble brags all the goddamn time about like, oh yeah, sorry, I've got to go to Egypt for a job for a month or two. It's it's real rough, hard times here, and whatnot. But it's interesting now that you've become more progressive and you have had all of these life experiences and traveled the world, and you work basically for yourself. You're an independent contractor, right? In most of these situations. Um,
Yeah, that's what most of the people working in the film and television industry are
Mhm.
independent contractors. We find ourselves unemployed every 2 to 3 times a year because you work on a project, and once you finish that project or that season,
Mhm.
you're let go, and you may be invited back, but there's going to be long lags in between those times. So you have to find a new job, and
So
yeah.
that kind of brought me to one of our favorite topics. We cover it a lot, is unions and workers' rights and that sort of thing, as well as um, just social services, or lack thereof in this country. We don't have universal health care or child care or any type of care or guaranteed housing, or it's like be rich or die are your two options in the United States. And this has been a good year for unions, and I think kind of one of the torchbearers of the union wins this year was SAG-AFTRA, the Writers Guild and all that going on this year. And you're not in
Yeah.
either of those unions, correct?
No, because so I would be I am not a member of any union, but if I was, I would still be different unions because since I work in the documentary
Mhm.
slash factual space, it's a completely different. That was more like the scripted
Yeah.
actors side of things.
But you still know obviously a lot of these people, and you work on in very similar, very.
Oh,
Mhm.
so many. Oh yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I had so many
I
friends on the
think
picket line.
you probably have kind of like a unique perspective, especially here, with the exception of giving us more Korean voiceover TV shows on Netflix. Can you tell us how the strikes kind of have affected your career specifically, the industry as a whole, and do you think it was a net positive, being up close and personal and seeing how everything's done without being too up close and personal, that you're actually in it?
I saw a meme the other day to in reference back to your thing about everyone just being rich to
Mm-hmm.
live, and it was something like you have more in common with a homeless person than you
Oh,
do a
absolutely.
billionaire.
A millionaire.
And it is one of those things where you just recognize that you as an individual can't really fight for yourself well or strongly, but as a collective
Mm-hmm.
you can. And the fact that the union absolutely has a net positive effect with the recent strikes in Hollywood. That absolutely needed to happen because, like, here's the thing, and I tell people this all the time: everyone assumes that everyone who works in Hollywood, and it's because of Hollywood that they
Mm-hmm.
have these ideas in the first place. But like everyone who works in Hollywood is driving around in a
Mm-hmm.
Maserati or something like that and lives in a huge home in the Hollywood Hills. Those people actually exist. Those are generally the people at the very top who are paying all the rest of us who are driving around in Subarus and Hondas and stuff like that, living in apartments and normal homes. Like 90%, 95% of everyone who works in the industry, including actors that you would potentially
Mm-hmm.
recognize, not movie stars, but actors that you would probably recognize, are living absolutely, completely normal lives with normal homes and normal cars. They're not making gigantic amounts of money. And because you don't have a steady job and you're waiting for the next gig to start or something like that, you're constantly unemployed, as I said, between things all the time, looking for more work. And that is a very difficult industry to stay alive in. And it is a very demoralizing thing to do
Mm-hmm.
year after year after year. There are times I'm just like, do I just need to get a normal job? Is it about time I just get like a real job? Not that I'd want to sit in a cubicle and and I'd be so sad and I'd wither. But at the same point, there are times when I'm like, man, that would just make
Yeah.
things simpler. And so the ability to be able to ensure that you can take care of yourself and have get the especially when there are studios led by these billionaires, legitimate billionaires who are just trying to look at every possible way they can to get more money by paying out
Mm-hmm.
less money, is why you absolutely have to have those things. When you're
Well.
having things like, well, we can replace all these special effects artists with AI. We can replace
Mm-hmm.
the writers. We can do all these sorts of things. I understand, there's always anytime there's some new
Mm-hmm.
speaking of AI specifically, anytime there's some new technological breakthrough, it disrupts things. And it needs to. Because I mean, at some point in time, we used to have there are like if you go back in time, you read stories about how
Mm-hmm.
elevator operators, like there used to be
Yep.
operators in every elevator, and like they would sit in the department store or whatever, they'd push those buttons for you. You
Mm-hmm.
don't need that person. But when that was kind of like being pushed away, like they freaked out and
Yep.
said you're taking away jobs. Um, you know, the printing
Mm-hmm.
computers and the internet compared to printing
Phone
presses for normal
operators.
newspapers. There are times when there are technological sea changes that happen and that need to happen, and there will be disruptions. And and so I'm not saying that like everything is this gigantic evil, but when your entire thing is I just want to make billions more for myself and a couple of my friends at the expense of tens, hundreds of thousands of employees, then then you're just putting yourself on an evil pedestal. That there's nothing about that
Eh,
isn't
yeah. And I think
diabolical.
one of the biggest examples of that during the writer's strike was when one of those big CEOs had all the tops of the trees cut off alongside the sidewalk, so the strikers had to stand in the sun. And it was like
Yes.
you realize just like the
Yeah.
optics of that, like how it's a dick move to begin with, but it's the amount of fucked up you have to be in the head to even come up with that. Because if I was in that position, it's not even something that would have ever crossed my mind. Is like, oh yeah, I should lob off the top of all of these fucking trees so they're a little more uncomfortable outside striking.
Yeah. You work in film and television. Do you not understand that this is a villain move?
Right.
This is what the villain, this is what the big bad does. Like, are you? I guess you're okay
Yeah.
with being
I,
that.
I mean, I
Yeah, I mean, they didn't specifically for that. Like, they received bad press for it for a little bit, but it was kind of, a little bit
successful.
completely,
Yeah.
forgotten in a
Mm-hmm.
week or two, and it probably wasn't forgotten in a week or two for those people standing there for the next 2
No.
months. Like, I don't know, they get away with everything.
They do. They do.
That and the thing about strikes are, and this is one of those things that was so difficult for so many people when you're doing it, is you're not only doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for everyone who's going to follow behind you years to
Mm-hmm.
come, or the younger people who are just now entering into the industry. You're doing it to protect them and make sure that they have a solid footing as they come into this world. But when you're going on strike, that is a very difficult thing. Especially that one
Mm-hmm.
lasted months. And there were people, I loved that there were people who are stepping up and like paying
Mm-hmm.
people's mortgages, or restaurants that were like, you can free food here for as
Mm-hmm.
long as the strike's going on. That kind of thing was amazing because it's a really hard thing to do. It's a very easy thing to say, I can't afford to do the very thing that is going to allow me
Mm-hmm.
long
To
term
afford.
to be
Mm-hmm.
able to afford to live. And that's what, like, I think a lot of the companies were. really hoping to just stretch it out long enough that people just caved, and they didn't. And it was one of those things like, you saw this coming. You're going to lose this. You
Hmm.
have to lose this. And I'm very glad they did. And it's kind of exposed this seedy underbelly of the corporate greed in a really palpable way, because while you can have strikes at GM and stuff like that, and that's going to make the news, it's not as sexy news as it is like your television.
Right.
It's something that impacts people. Like, there's no new
Hmm.
movies or no new TV shows or lots of repeats. And it's something they're going to pay
Hmm.
attention to, and that was in some ways that made it more, kind of got out into the public consciousness, the idea of what was being done to hurt other people and benefit others, benefit the 1%, if you want to break it
Oh,
down that way.
I completely agree. And I mean, obviously, like I said, it was a great year for unions, and I really think that is a big reason why, is that kind of visibility that provided. Um, but we try, especially, I doubt that there's a whole lot of really anti-union conservative people that give us the time of day on this podcast or any of my content. But um, I try to at least address arguments against the topics that I talk about. And one of the things that you always hear is, that unions end up hurting workers and that sort of thing. And one thing that you've been talking about pretty publicly lately is that there's kind of an industry contraction going on in the entertainment industry. A lot
Mm.
of, especially in reality TV, which you informed me documentaries are a part of, and the fact that they put Jersey Shore and The Real Housewives in the same genre as Cosmos makes me want to literally just tear the whole country down and start over. We went wrong somewhere, but
Which is why I used the word factual
you
earlier
know,
rather than reality, because those of us who don't spend any time in like Jersey Shore world or any of these kinds of things, we're like, there's a distinction here. Like, it's a big umbrella, but we're on two very different sides of
Oh,
this
definitely.
umbrella.
But anyway, so that industry contraction, do you attribute any of that to the strike's success? Do you feel that it's making it slightly less profitable and therefore not worth it for these production companies to continue moving forward with a lot of this, sort of trash TV and not trash TV on your side of it? But you know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, that's actually something that people are trying to answer a lot right now. It's actually been going on for a while. It started contracting even before the strikes, and you could easily make the argument that some of that contraction was one of the reasons
Hmm.
that inspired the strikes to begin with in the first place. Um, but yeah, the contraction's been going on. It seems just in the last couple weeks to maybe be getting a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, it started. It seemed to kind of start when you had the acquisition of Warner Brothers, the Warner Brothers Discovery merger, and all that kind of stuff. That put a kibosh on a lot of people's work for a long time. And then coming out of the strike, and you have all of this continued stuff of, on top of that, you had so many companies that put so much money into streaming. They were just throwing everything at streaming because it was going to
Hmm.
be the great big savior, right? Like, we were all cutting all of our cords and we're going to start doing this kind of thing. And now we're all spending as much, if not more money than when we had cable. And the streaming services are now pulling back on so much content because they went way too much money into it, which is one of the reasons they were trying to milk everything they could out of the people that they're working for. You hear all these stories of people, uh,
Hmm.
the Marvel special effects artists and stuff like that, who are just being overworked. Everyone's being overworked and underpaid. My last gig I just got off of was, the network wanted double the amount of hours for the same amount, and a little even less money than they'd spent the budget from the last season. And it was just like one of these things like, this can't keep going on.
Hmm.
This is not a long-term strategy for either making good shows or pe- keeping people doing that without them, coming apart at the seams. So it is been a very difficult thing. But yes, there are ripple effects coming from the strikes that are still people are still picking up the pieces, and that is still filtering into all the different arenas. And it sucks, but you have to stop thinking about the present tense problems and recognize that everything you've been doing is to make sure that your long-term viability and future is good, even if you have some immediate
Something I
struggles.
love that you.
I'm always reminding myself, like Neil deGrasse Tyson talked about, the
Mhm.
cosmic perspective. Don't look at this right here. Look at all of this out
Speaking of
here.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, how did they get him in the J-Lo movie? That was just unacceptable.
I
Oh,
didn't
he
know he
plays a
was in the
zodiac
J-Lo
sign.
movie.
It's horrible. It was like I was like, man, couldn't you have just like sold your body on OnlyFans? I would have found that more respectable if you needed money. I don't know what you're doing in the J-Lo movie.
He was it was an acting role. He wasn't
What's
playing
the new
himself.
one? All the faces or like all the figures of me, or what is that movie called that she's in?
Oh, it's this is
Yeah.
me
Yes.
dot now.
Right.
Right. I heard about it, and I heard that it
Oh,
was
it's awful. It is
terrible.
absolutely the worst thing I think I've ever seen. And like I saw Freddy Got Fingered. It's horrible. And just like
Neil has this amazing pop culture cachet, you know? I mean, he in terms of the science communicator-ness of it, you know, he is the same. He has that Carl Sagan mantle, but he does it in a way that even
oh
Carl
yeah.
Sagan couldn't do, because Carl Sagan was all like Mr.
Mhm.
Rogers science wisdom, but he lacked Neil's ability
Oh, Neil's
to
got the charisma, the Riz.
also insert himself in the very.
I said Neil's got
What's
that
that?
charisma, the Riz as the kids say, like that Sagan didn't have.
Yes, he absolute, and he understands pop culture, and he's always kind of fluent in it, and that allows him to kind of
Mhm.
insert himself or be inserted in places where you wouldn't expect him to
No.
be.
Anyway, that was just a side tangent because you mentioned Neil there, but
Mm.
um, I liked that you.
I'm responsible to him for
Yeah.
my work. Every job. I mean, Cosmos was my first. Once I got out of school, moved to LA, and didn't have a job and was looking for work. And I was starting much later than everyone because, as you said, I
Mhm.
have this varied career going back with military and all these different things. And so by the time I moved to LA to start trying to work in film, I was already 35. I was older than you
Mhm.
are when I started to break into an entirely new industry. And that was a scary thing. And nobody wanted to hire me because, like, I'm this untested older guy. I had this interview once with an agent, and he was like, "This is the best resume I've ever seen come across my desk, and there's no way in hell I'm hiring you
Hmm.
because I need someone I can boss around and call a shithead
Mhm.
and tell him to go pick up my laundry and do all these things and get me a hotter cup of coffee and blah blah blah." He goes, "You're not going to do that because you're a grown ass man,
Mhm.
and you're going to be like, fuck off, go get your own." He goes, "And you should do that, but that's not what I need." So I got a lot of that kind of stuff when I moved to LA, and it was only because of Neil was coming out to do a Bill Maher show, be on Real Time, and he's like, "Hey, I'm coming out. Let's have some dinner." And there's only one person I know in Hollywood, and that's Seth MacFarlane. He's making a new Cosmos series, so and he's like, "Let's go have dinner, the three of us." And so we went out, and I literally told Seth. I asked Seth who I had to sleep with to work on Cosmos, and that was his. That's the
Whoa, whoa,
history that
whoa, whoa!
started it
So,
all.
I mean, again, it's always the humble brags. There's only just one person I knew in Hollywood, and it was Seth MacFarlane. You know, you probably never heard of him. This guy. Anyway, so I know you've told me, but how did you meet Seth MacFarlane, and how did I didn't know Seth MacFarlane worked on Cosmos. Like that's
Right.
not a connection I would have ever have made.
Seth was the executive producer. Cosmos would not have been made without Seth. Seth is a massive science fan, and and if you watch some of his things, even like the Orville and stuff like that, you'll recognize that. Or if you've seen any of his interviews and stuff like that, that guy jazzes on science. And he met Neil at a bar, and Neil was saying something about really wanting to get. He'd been talking with Anne Dryan, Carl Sagan's widow, and that they'd been trying to get another Cosmos off the ground. And Seth was like, "I love that idea. Can I pitch that idea to Fox?" And because of his star power, that's how Cosmos got
That is
made.
insane.
And so, and I met Seth that night when Neil said, "Let's go out to dinner," and he invited Seth, and we all had dinner. And I always tell people, if you want to know how really rich people eat dinner, the dessert menu came out, and Seth was like, "Oh, that looks good. Ooh, that looks good. Ooh, that looks. Hey, why don't you just bring me one of everything?" I was like, oh, okay, that's how
So
this
so
works.
Neil Oh,
But yeah, Seth had wanted to. He said something at that dinner about wanting to see the inside of Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the NASA Center, JPL. And I had just moved to LA, and I was staying with one of the directors at JPL because I knew his daughter. And I was like, oh, I can make that happen, Seth. I wasn't sure that I actually could, but
take
I
my
was like,
shot.
yeah, let me make sure to get you a tour. It was like one of those moments where like you see in a movie where like, I have to seize this, even if I don't know if I can do this, I have to seize this. So I was like, yeah, I'll make that happen. And when I contacted JPL, they're more than happy to have Seth MacFarlane get a tour. And so on that tour, it was himself, his girlfriend at the time, and me. And then at the end of it, he had written on his badge, name Seth MacFarlane, host Brandon Fibbs. And I took a picture of it and I was like, Seth, I don't want this to be the last time your name and my name share a screen credit. And that's when I said, who do I have to sleep with to work on Cosmos? And he set me up with an interview with his producer that week. And that got the ball rolling. And I moved to LA thinking I was going to work in films because everyone moves to LA think they just want to work in movies. And that set me on a path of working in science documentaries because I also had a friend who worked for Morgan Freeman's company, and so I suddenly was going back and forth. And after that, it was just like science documentaries and history all the time. And it was not what I meant to do when I moved to LA. And I'm so happy that's what I
accident.
chanced into because
So
I can look at myself in the mirror every day and know I'm doing great, like cool things that are expanding people's
that's
minds.
amazing. So one thing that I was a little, I guess, you knew Neil before Seth. Neil introduced you to Seth. How did you meet
Yes.
Neil then? I thought Seth introduced you to Neil. I'm sorry, I had that backwards. So how'd you meet Neil? I mean, because it's the same thing. Like how he's also not a person you just usually, bump into on the sidewalk and become best friends with. That he's inviting you to dinner with Seth MacFarlane.
My ex-wife works for NASA, has for most of the last 20 years. And before she worked for NASA, she was the director of communications for the Space Foundation, which is the largest nonprofit space advocacy organization in the world. And their headquarters was in Colorado.
Isn't that the one that Bill Nye is like chair of or something right now?
No, that's the Planetary
Can't
Foundation.
keep them all straight. Okay, sorry. Continue.
I know. And Neil was on the board of the Space Foundation, where my ex-wife was the director of communications. And so they interacted in a professional way. And then I met him at the Space Symposium, which is a big event they do every April. It just wrapped a couple days ago at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. And just met Neil and we hit it off. And it just became this thing. Once we moved to New York for me to go to NYU, we hung out a number of times. And then when we moved to DC, when he'd come down, like we'd always have dinner and stuff like that. And when I moved to LA, it was the same thing. Anytime he came out to LA, we'd try to have dinner and stuff like that. So yeah, Neil is not only responsible for my career getting off, because I knew I just needed to get a foot in the door. I just needed, like, I could pull myself through. Someone just needs to open that door so I can pull myself through. And Neil was the person who did that. Neil's also the person who was instrumental for the dismantling of my faith. And I don't know if you want to get into that, but
well, you and I are going to get into that.
Neil never derided my faith. Neil never derided my faith. He never said your faith is ridiculous, because I was still a believer when we met. He just said, hey, I want you to check this out. This is science. And then just step back and he knew it would happen. And he knew I'd just be like, whoa, that's amazing. And that kind of did its own thing. But yeah, many, many nights till 2:00 in the morning, putting down a bottle or two of wine, talking about God and the universe and stuff with Neil is an experience I wish everyone could have.
That sounds absolutely like a wet dream.
I don't know that I've ever been more envious or jealous of a person in my entire life than I am right now in this moment. This is something I'm learning in real time. I did not have this backstory going into this, and every fucking time I talk to you, it's always something new that I didn't know. I don't know how. Like, we've been talking for 2 years now, I think it's been, and every time, and God. And I'm jealous just all the time.
I have to pinch myself sometimes.
That is insane. All right, well, this Neil deGrasse Tyson thing was not something I had scripted into this, and I'm glad we went down that rabbit hole. But before I completely forget, I wanted to go back to the union thing a little bit. And you had mentioned that the contracting had been happening a little bit beforehand. And I really liked that you pointed that out. And he pointed out that Warner Brothers and Discovery merged, which obviously, if we want to get into economics, and we won't get in super deep right now, but that merger is obviously anti-competitive. These are the kinds of things that, if Teddy Roosevelt was still around, he'd be swinging a big stick like a helicopter,
Yes.
and those kinds of things. And then you said that led to the strike, and I appreciate that you pointed that out, because it's one of those things that the cause and effect is in reality probably much closer to that, where these contractions were going on a little bit before because companies made some poor decisions, and then we had this big anti-competitive merger, and then that spurred all of these people all the little guys who were getting fucked in the process to go on strike. And now that the strike happened, a lot of the companies are, a lot of the CEOs and the billionaires are like, look what strikes do. Now you don't have a job, and this is your own fault, sort of thing, and kind of trying to pass that blame onto them. So I really appreciate you pointing that out, and just wanted to highlight that, I think, in bold and italics.
Yeah. It certainly wasn't the only
Mhm.
cause, but it was absolutely one of the contributing factors.
Yeah. And I had a question. Since you're in the film industry, and I'm interested in AI, I'm sure you are as well. Certainly, like you said, there are some aspects to AI that just revolutionized the industry and just make things that were maybe impossible or financially very difficult to overcome, potentially more possible. I was wondering if there were any ways that you thought that it just feels very ethical, and just like it's a day one, like this is where AI can make a huge difference that doesn't necessarily impact people. And then was there anything that you saw or you're seeing right now that is like just completely, like utterly unethical, and is just like a supervillain type move by implementing, this aspect of AI?
Any technology is, as we've learned down through the centuries, it's amoral, right? Like, you can use it for good or you can use it for evil. You can use atomic energy to power cities, or you can use it to wipe them off the face of the map. Like, everything has an extraordinary use and a truly diabolical use. And AI is going to be no different. I mean, AI is already doing some extraordinary things, and it's going to continue to do extraordinary things. One of my favorite things about science and technology is the benefit that comes, the thing that is the thing we all remember and that changes the world, is rarely the thing we were conceiving when the thing first appeared. Because we always think so linearly, and we're like, okay, there's this thing and it's going to lead to that, when in actuality that never happens, or if it does, it's not that big of a thing. But this spins off over here, and suddenly we've figured out how to launch a rocket to the moon. Like, there's all these kinds of weird little connections that go in. I've not seen, I mean, I'm witnessing very good things, mundane, average, but like AI helping when I'm editing through hours and hours of interview or going through footage. It's already being able to categorize everything and chop out lots of the interstitial stuff, and kind of compact things, and it can switch camera angles based on who's speaking. So that's just one less thing I have to do. There are lots of good things happening. My phone can now identify what is that flower, what's that bush, what is that piece of art, what is this. Like, there are amazing things happening, like that, at the same time that I don't want everyone to be so reactionary and freaking out,
right.
because we do this about technology. We always do this. And so much of our freakouts about AI and other things are based on movies, right? Like, we're shooting ourselves in the foot sometimes.
Right.
Like, I shared a video on Facebook this morning from the latest video from Boston Dynamics, their latest robot. And this thing was a contortioning. It's just Boston Dynamics, if you know them, their robots are
and horrific. I mean, those things are scary as shit.
People are like, oh my God.
Dogs.
Yeah, the dog, you kick it and
But why are they scary
because
as
it looks alive. Because it looks
Why is it
alive, and then
scary?
they're out there kicking this dog-looking thing, and it gets back up, and it's like pretty soon that thing's gonna turn around and go Terminator on you, and that's it. That's how Skynet happens.
But see, and that's my point. And you just exactly made my point. So many of the things that we reference, the reasons
Pop
that we
culture.
fear things, are because of our science fiction and our movies and things that we've made. And that's not saying that life's going to go down that road. In fact, when you're making a movie and you need drama and conflict, you're not going to make a movie about an AI just being
Mm-hmm.
wonderful. Maybe you occasionally do. You have something like Her, which is a
Yeah, really good.
wonderful film, but like AI may be more like Her than
Right.
T2. And so I do want to make sure that like people don't lose
Mm-hmm.
sight of the fact that there could be extraordinary things coming from AI helping us, and not to be like just this knee jerk sort of it's going to have to be bad. And which gets me back to my original point, which is merely that it is an amoral thing, and we have to be able to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that everything we are doing in using and implementing it is going to be for the greatest benefit and good for the greatest amount of people, and not use it to trample all over people. And there again, there will be certain segments in both film or in many industries in which it's going to hurt certain people's jobs, and
Mm-hmm.
like the elevator operator sort of analogy, that history is full of. Um, it I'm not going to say I'm not going to lie. It can be a very difficult quandary when you're saying, if I do this thing, it is going to make all of these things so much easier and better and faster. Oh, but it's going to hurt all of those people over there. And you have to weigh the balance of, maybe I have to shift the world toward this. But what I appreciate is, especially like when you have like the president talking about, okay, if we're going to remove all these guys from coal, we have to get off coal, but we're going to take those workers and we're going to retrain them into solar and wind and stuff like that. Like, don't leave people high
Mm-hmm.
and dry. If you're going to destroy a livelihood, I think it should be your responsibility. If you're seeing technology and stuff shift to a different place, then you need to take care of those people, and those should be the first people you invite to go with you into this brave new world with these new products, um, so that like there's least pain and cataclysm as
Right. And
humanly
I think that's
possible.
something as leftists we sort of kind of gloss over it. We're like, they're like, oh, AI's taking jobs away and that's going to be bad for people and for workers. And it's like, well, actually, AI could get us closer to a post-scarcity society that
Mm-hmm.
is supposed to be what we're aiming to achieve.
Right.
And like, there's obviously,
Right.
in the moment, truck driving jobs, mining jobs, all tons and tons of jobs that can be potentially automated. And on one hand, people are losing jobs, and under our current society, there's no safety net for those people
Mm-hmm.
to have to move to another job. Like,
Right.
they can get unemployment for maybe half a year, maybe a
Yeah.
year, and then they're on their own. And you're expecting somebody to just retool in that time, and that's probably not realistic. And in the meantime, they probably have almost no health insurance, and like it's a rough transition in our current system. And certainly, wages haven't kept up with production
Mm-hmm.
levels that have increased with technology advancements. But
That is an excellent segue to the next thing that I'm gonna
oh,
fuck completely up because I
that's
wanted to bring up more. But that was so good. That was so good, and I feel so bad about it because that's kind of the next stuff we want to talk
go
about.
for
But
it.
I
Go
appreciate
for it.
it.
I do everything I do is for you, man.
I know. I know.
I know.
You're a good friend. Um, but no, on the AI thing, I agree that I think it's been really overblown. I've said this because people bring it up a lot as that like this is just going to eliminate jobs. But the thing is that and maybe I might be eating crow on this one because I'm like, there's certain jobs that you can't replace with AI because people just require human interaction for certain things. Like obviously our economy's become much more service based, and a lot of the jobs that didn't exist before that we have now because people have in theory more free time because we're more productive because of mechanization and technology, to go out to eat more and go out to drink. And like when I do that, one of my favorite things is interacting with the people at a restaurant or a bar and that sort of thing. um, and all of these things come with new jobs that you can't even imagine. Like obviously when the world got mechanized, now it has maintenance jobs, and where you had horses and buggies before, now you had mechanics and so on. And I think that we see this every single time that a new technology comes around. It's going to be the end of the world and the end of nobody's ever going to work again. And I think that you're absolutely right. I think that there's a lot of promise for that. And
I mean, nobody ever working again sounds pretty good if
it
we can.
does. It does. If we can
actually
afford to live.
well,
Yeah.
if the robots do the jobs, we can support each other.
But then.
Yeah, if there was a safety net, if we lived in a
Mhm.
if we lived in a world in which you didn't have to
Yeah.
freak out when you
Mhm.
lose your job, then this would be a lot less of a conversation
Right.
than it is. But because so many people are living paycheck to paycheck, and or since we've tied healthcare to
Mm.
jobs rather than just a right that you can have, when you do all of these things, it's losing a job isn't merely losing some spending money or something like that. It is the potential collapse of
Mhm.
everything that you currently rest your life on, and it turns the foundations to sand, and that is a that is the bigger fault here, the bigger picture. It's like it's the canary in the coal mine that's letting you see that there's something far more serious wrong out
I
here
can't pass up.
with the entire
I
structure
can't
of it.
pass up two segues in a row. I was gonna keep going on, but I can't. I can't do it. That's another perfect segue. So my next question was gonna be, being an artist, independent contractor, which I can relate to. It has tons of obstacles, right? Just by the nature of what the work is. But doing it in America is an obstacle all its own because of a lot of the stuff that we were just talking about. And you've talked about how you're out of work 2-3 times a year. That's just part of the life you live and kind of the stress of doing that. And but you've also been around the world, and you've probably, I presume, know lots of people who don't have to worry about going bankrupt if they go to the doctor, or paying $1,000 a month premium on health insurance, or having to pay off their student loan debt in their mid 50s or anything like that. Um, and how big of an obstacle is that? Obviously, you see this with the other people in your industry. You live it every day, and you see other people who don't have to deal with those particular obstacles. Do you feel like the lack of you know, all of those things makes it more difficult to get into creative or just independent careers in general, where you're not relying on a big corporation? Um,
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Because there, like you said, there's no safety net. There's, it's, your safety net is the goodwill of friends
mhm,
and family at that point, to see you through in case there's a problem. Or, I constantly try to have enough in savings, not for future savings, but for the in between each show. What happens if it isn't a couple weeks? What happens if it's
mhm,
months and months between the two jobs, which is what's going on with a lot of people right now? Um, and like you have to, it just changes your entire world about how you arrange your money. Like, I don't have healthcare that comes through work. I don't have a 401k. All of those things I have because I have to do it on the
mhm,
side myself. I have to manage all of that stuff myself. And yes, it is a challenging thing to get into any sort of art related, entertainment related, anything sort of world, because the entire structure of our country and economics is based on a work based sort of thing. And once that falls away, you're cut adrift. And that's a terrifying thing. And like I said, I'm constantly thinking about, is it time to just go get a normal job? And we even talk about like normal jobs as if like the stuff I do may not be typical for like a lot of people sitting in a 9 to 5
mhm,
sort of office thing, but it's it's not something as any of my as my partner or any of my friends can talk about, how much time is spent, how much work is spent on these sorts of things. It's not like a cushy, easy sort of job. We work our butts off in this industry to make the things that you hopefully
mhm.
are enjoying. But yeah, it's a freaky thing. And there's probably several times a year that I'm just like, is it time to just walk away from this, because there's no long-term viability? Or you start to recognize that I may not be able to ever indulge in, and you've talked a lot about this, Jordan, on your TikTok, in terms of, there's an entire generation of of some millennials and definitely Gen Z that are like, I'll probably never own a house. Like there's a whole part of what other people are doing or what older generations did that I may never be able to indulge in. And I, even as a Gen Xer, was like, I totally get
Mm-hmm.
that. I totally get that. Like I've chosen a profession that is fun and exciting and fulfilling, and at the same time there's no sort of future stability in it, and it's still something that occasionally keeps me up at night because there isn't any sort of apparatus in it that allows you to create a safety
See,
net.
and that I
It's all, I mean, it's hard. Like when you
mhm.
get into something that you love to do, there are
Yeah.
consequences for that.
And I think especially like knowing you, because for most of us, TV and high level entertainment is such an otherworldly thing. Like we don't most people don't personally know somebody who works hand in hand with that industry on kind of the level that you do, and now that I do have that privilege, and I have thoroughly enjoyed, even before knowing you, some of the things that you've had personal hands in producing that I've consumed that I think have positively affected my life. And it's that realization that it's one of those, this is too stressful moments for I think you're an incredibly brilliant person. I think you're a really good entertainer. I think you're a thorough researcher, and I think that quality that you bring to these things is part of why I've personally enjoyed them, and millions of other people have enjoyed kind of the work that you've worked on. And it's one of those things that, had you been, it's not worth me paying this healthcare premium every day because I don't know that I can afford this through this lull period of going and getting that cubicle job, and those things may not, those projects may not have ever happened, or may not have been up to the quality where they would have been as impactful on as many people. And it makes it that much more tangible. And obviously it's tangible to me because I live that same life. I've been self-employed for the majority of my life, and now I'm doing something that I guess you could call entertainment industry related, that I rely on for some of my income. And it's a daily worry all the time about, is this enough to be sustainable? And but that's my own personal thing, and I've got my own vested roots in that. But seeing it on somebody like your level makes it a lot more tangible for me, and I hope it makes it more tangible for other people, because this is something that I preach all the time: is these things hurt.
And sorry to interrupt you. I've had friends who are like, when I'm in between a project or something like that, like, you should lean into your TikToks. Like, I don't make any money from, I haven't made a single cent from any of my TikToks. I do it because it's fun.
Mhm.
And, but at the same time, people are like, oh, you should try to monetize this and that. And there are people who make a living on TikTok. And I'm like, oh my God, that sounds even worse than what I currently do. Because like then you're that, because every day it goes from something fun into something that this has to
Mhm.
work. And obviously when you're doing something like that, you're not even working for a company. So like I may be set adrift, but then I still am working for a company every time I
Mhm.
produce something. But when you're a TikToker, like everything, you're having to handle again all your own healthcare, all your own everything. Like if if the sort of structure, being my partner's
Mhm.
Belgian, and obviously growing up in Europe, and only moving to the States within the last like 5 years, she has a completely different sort of perspective of the sort of safety net that is a pretty standard safety net throughout almost the entirety of
Mhm.
Europe, at least Western Europe. Versus here, it's interesting the conversations we have where she comes here and obviously her healthcare is the same as my healthcare in terms of if something goes wrong, she doesn't have the safety net that she did if she was back in Belgium, and and so we're constantly running into these little things, and they're not all bad. Sometimes she's like, "Oh my God, I love that Americans do
Mhm.
this or that so much better than Europe," but then there are plenty of other things too. She's just like baffled by why. Why are you guys? Why do you make it so hard to live? Why is every day a traumatic? I like, I was talking to her like most every American, 9.9 out of every 10 American is one catastrophic injury or car accident or something away
Homelessness, yeah.
from
Mhm.
erasing everything, and that's how we all live. That's like I think we're it's so normal to us that we don't even even recognize it half the time, that it's the matrix operating system that's constantly streaming in the background. But at some point we just should stop and go, that is fucked up, and we can't keep living like this. This is absurd that we have allowed ourselves to live
It
like
is
this.
absolutely mind-boggling, and I talk about it all the time. And this is one of the things that I really like. I think, and it's bad for capitalism. Honestly, not having those basic safety nets is just bad for capitalism because it stops entrepreneurs from being entrepreneurs. It stops, brilliant people who could make amazing entertainment and educational stuff from doing what they love to do, just because they literally would die without working for some big corporate overlord in some soul sucking job, and they're just forced to do that. Which brings me to. Mhm.
Yeah, like you said with me, like forget
Mhm.
the artist, even me, like saying that like this show may not have been done had I just taken an office job. Forget the entertainment, as much
Mhm.
as we all need and love and require escape through entertainment and stuff like that. Think about the engineer who never engineered
Right.
the thing, the scientist who never became a scientist
Mhm.
to science the thing, the doctor who never became a doctor. Like, so there's so many things in the world that have never happened because someone's like, I can't jump from here to there without potentially falling. And if I fall, I'll never get back up again. So I'm just going to take the safe route and go over here and not do that thing. And the road untaken. How many people haven't taken that road because it's just littered
And
with
if
so
and
many
if you really take the
landmines.
time to think about it, how depressing that thought is. Like, how could we have, cured cancer or solved climate change or any of these things that people haven't done?
Flying cars,
Flying car, yeah, we
jetpacks.
could
Come
have,
on.
we could be living the Jetsons right now
Okay.
with this, and then you look at the repercussions of those brilliant people working for these mega corporations, and one of them that's always stuck with me, partially because it's really close to home, geographically, but 3M, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, one of the biggest companies in the world, located here, obviously in Minnesota, invented the Post-it note. But the company didn't invent the Post-it note. A guy who worked for the company invented the Post-it note. And you'd think, like, man, the Post-it note, like, when I had an office job, I looked like Rain Man. My cubicle was covered in Post-it notes because I have ADHD and no
That doesn't
Right.
organizational
that doesn't
skills
surprise me one bit.
whatsoever. Um, so uh, so I was like, that guy's got to be loaded. That's an incredible, like, world-changing invention. Like, everybody's familiar with the Post-it note. No, he lives in a very solidly middle-class house in Maplewood, Minnesota, where my in-laws live. The neighborhoods, I'm familiar with them, and I'm just like, this is where that dude lives, a guy who invented something, because 3M, he made it at 3M. 3M owned his his patent, and so, like, where could how many people like that either just don't put in the effort to do those things because they know they're never going to get any credit for it, they're never going to reap the rewards, or how many of those people would have taken the rewards that they got from that, and rather than focusing on shareholder returns, had invested that into their own company that could have came up with so many more innovative things, but they didn't because they had to pay off student debt or worry about healthcare premiums. And it's so depressing to think about how different and how much better the world could be, and how stifling our capitalist hellscape can be on innovation when they always praise capitalism for being the greatest driver of innovation in human history. And
It's the best at efficiency.
yeah, and in some ways it is. When you want to make new televisions or cars or something like that, in a lot of ways it really can drive innovation. But if you don't give people the chance to be competitive, because the thing that drives innovation
At
is
what expense?
competition, and the way that we have it set up right now, it's not competitive, and that's not free market
Well,
capitalism that drives.
depending on who you ask.
And the way we have it set up.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Brandon.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I was just gonna say, and the way we have it set up right now is that you, as a young person, when you get out of high school and go into college, you immediately take that step. One of the first things you do as an adult is take on a massive crushing
Mm-hmm.
debt that will take you decades to pay off. And the interest accrues to the point where suddenly you're paying the thing 3 times what you initially got. Like, the American society is set up to cut you right at the Achilles
Mm-hmm.
heel,
Right out of the starting gate.
is from the moment you hit the starting off, from the moment that gun goes off and you start running, you're
Mm-hmm.
crippled. And it's just like that is not a way to maximize human flourishing.
No, it's not. Did you have something else?
I was just going to say that some people would say that is the purpose of capitalism, is to conglomerate. Like, there is no other way to do it without major safety rails, which haven't existed ever in society. And so under any form of capitalism that we've ever seen it always will end in monopolies, and it always will end in inequality.
Oh, I mean, I've said before, if you read The Wealth of Nations today, you know, the Bible of capitalism, if you read it without knowing anything about it, you'd put it right next to Karl Marx, as this is socialism, or damn near as communist as you're going to get, especially if you put it in the context of the time it was written. It's crazy what it's been, you know, bastardized and molested into, to putting us back into a damn near feudal society. At least that's kind of the way that it feels a lot of the time. But
You mentioned Teddy Roosevelt. If Teddy Roosevelt was alive right now, that man would not be a Republican.
No, well,
if you look at everything he did, those are not Republican ideals. You know, that breaking apart monopolies and protecting it's. Yeah, they're just certain. It's a fascinating thing to look at history and recognize how things have influxed.
To be fair, he was a Republican before Republicans were
Republicans.
Yeah.
But the party switch never happened, guys. Remember, it just totally didn't happen. Yeah. Democrats are the KKK. That's the way that it's always been.
Why do so many of our Republican friends think that is a got you? Like that, did you know that, like, in all the during slavery and stuff like that, that was all the Democrats and stuff like that?
Yeah, because I passed fifth grade history.
Not a got you. What? Yeah, like the fact that, yes, both parties have pretty much completely flipped over the years. So your gotcha is that now you are the party of like pro-racism and slavery and stuff like that, and you think that's a good thing? You think me changing my party way back in the history, changing and realigning its priorities to actually toward good and right ethics is a bad thing?
It baffles my mind.
Never understood that line of argument.
To point this out, I don't think I've actually ever pointed this out to a real conservative in real life, but that the Republican Party was essentially founded in a commune in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
In Ripon, near Ripon, Wisconsin. And like, I just think that would absolutely blow somebody's mind. You're like, yeah, a commune, aka a socialist organization, created the Republican Party, or as we think of it.
Not as we think of it today, right, but yeah, the modern Republican Party started, as a commune.
And then, but the modern Republican Party has still been like this for some time. Like, you know, I right now I'm reading Doris Kearns Goodwin's Team of Rivals about Lincoln. You know, now that is the birth of the literal Republican Party in terms of
on a national stage,
being
absolutely.
the representative of what we understand the national stage today. But also a couple months back, I read a biography of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the stuff that was being leveled against his progressive policies, taking America out of the Great Depression and setting up Social Security and all this kind of stuff. It is copy and pasted. It's been 100 years, and it is copy and pasted from that to this. Like, it's a bunch of communists and socialists, and they want to take us down the road of tyranny and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, is that Marjorie Taylor? Oh, no, that's a Republican congressman from 1925. It is exactly the same language. It has not changed in a century. Every time somebody on the progressive side tries to say, hey, you know what? What if we stop spending all this money on this thing over here and set it up so that it creates the safety net for you and blah, blah, blah? It's the exact same reaction. And yet I don't know a single conservative other than someone who's wealthy enough to not need it or something like that, who is going to say, like, I don't want my Social Security taken away. I rely on that Social Security. I put my money into
socialism is bad
for the rest of my life. But socialism is bad, but also don't do anything that would hurt me, my benefits from.
But don't take my socialism security. You leave that alone. But socialism is the devil. And it's funny that you say that, going back to FDR, because a quote by Harry Truman, who I absolutely hate Truman. I would put him up as one of our worst presidents, definitely a top 5 worst president. But he was obviously FDR's vice president, and in 1952, there's a quote of him saying, "Socialism is a scare word that they've hurled at every advance the people have made in the last 20 years. Socialism is what they called public power. Socialism is what they called Social Security. Socialism is what they called farm price support. Socialism is what they called bank deposit insurance. Socialism is what they called the growth of free and independent labor organizations. Socialism is the name for almost anything that helps all the people." And that was 1952, and he's saying for
That's right.
2 decades prior to that. Yeah, it's all copy and paste. And then horse and sparrow economics, if you're familiar with that, is Reaganomics back from the late 1800s, and literally the Reaganomics is trickle down economics, and horse and sparrow economics was if you overfeed a horse so much grain, it's not going to digest it all, and then the sparrows can feed on the horse shit with the leftover undigested part of it. And so it's literally the same thing. If you overindulge the wealthy, it's going to trickle down, or they're going to shit it out. But eat shit economics apparently didn't have the same ring in the 1980s as it did in the late 1800s. But it's all, nothing's new, nothing's an original idea, and they're just recycling the same shit that has never worked, literally the same shit that has never worked in the history of society. And they're like, well, no, this is the time, guys. We got it this time. This is the one time. It's just try it one more time.
One of the benefits about being a student of history is seeing how things haven't changed, and I don't even also mean that in a bad way. Sometimes it's like when things feel unprecedented or unprecedentedly terrible, you can look back and go, okay, we've been through this before. We've been through worse before. We've gone through this. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be concerned about despotism and things like that in our own world right now, but take solace in the fact that we have been through these things before. We have defeated them in the past. We can defeat them again now and in the future. But yeah, we're doomed only by our inability to recognize that we're going through something that we've already been through before.
Absolutely. Well, and it doesn't help that, especially here in America, we have the attention span of a goldfish. So we tend to forget things that have happened, in our recent lifetimes, let alone things that happened 200 years ago. But
I just saw a report the other day that said that polling conducted, did you think that Trump was a good president and did great things for this country? And the numbers have gone up because it's been 4 years, and now people are like, oh, was he so bad? And I'm like, it was just 4 years ago, for crying out loud.
In all fairness, we've all tried to just black that part out of our lives. Like it was not a great time, not a bright moment. But
do not want to.
No, I don't either. And God, I'm horrified we're going to. A lot of people seem real overconfident, but I remember being overconfident in 2016, and that's left me with some serious PTSD on that topic.
I'm holding my breath. I feel like every day it's like I cannot give any sort of prediction. It feels completely just out there.
And it just feels like Biden's just one dumb action away from fucking it all up, and he keeps testing out how dumb can I get before
just showing that line like every day.
But one of the last questions I wanted to ask you on not having those safety nets and everything and the work that you do, especially because, again, I'm in nowhere near your level or even similar type of work, but doing creative work that requires my head to be in the game to produce something quality, and it really relies on me not being super stressed in the moment, and it relies on me being able to focus on this stuff, and a lot of these day-to-day stresses make it hard for me to do that a lot of the time, and obviously you're doing it on a much higher level. And do you think that the lack of these guaranteed basic necessities affects the quality of your work, the quality of your cohort? Do you think the people who have those basic necessities kind of guaranteed are able to consistently produce more quality work, or do you think that doesn't really affect things?
No, I think you're probably absolutely right. It's one of those intangible things that you can't necessarily always recognize. But if you recognize that, hey, I have to do a thing that kind of requires my whole head to be present in doing, and if I am constantly preoccupied with the stresses of either things I'm going through now or going through in the future. I mean, you could apply this to any sort of stressor
Mhm.
in anyone's life, not necessarily even economical.
Mhm.
If you're feeling ill, or if a family member has died or something like that, you are not entirely present. You're not going to be giving your 100% because you have half of your emotions and stuff completely tied up and otherwise occupied. And if you do have a sort of scenario in which you simply cannot, if you're always worried about like this position is going to end, and then there's another potential cataclysm coming up economically speaking, every time a new job starts and ends, I'm always kind of like, oh, is this the one? Is this the last one? Is and when I get out of this, is there going to be anything waiting for me? And that always kind of leads to the stress. Like, anytime you're near the end of a project, you're like, the stress starts
Mhm.
piling on because uh, probably when you need it to not be
Mhm.
piling on the most, because that's when you're literally running the final lap around the track, and I need all of my attention here. But no, I would agree. I just think that a lot of it is probably you don't even recognize
Mhm.
it necessarily. But it has to make a difference.
That's how I feel, and I was just wondering if, like, because again, you know people who do similar work in other countries that don't have those kinds of things. If you feel like their stress is less on the projects that they're working on or not, or if it's uh
I mean, it's even here
mhm.
in the States. Like, it's even people that have, and obviously there's like no sort of occupation that
Right.
is perfect, but just the idea of being able to know that, like, next Monday I will get up and I will go to my office and I have this thing, and I have a set paycheck and I have set benefits and I have healthcare and blah blah blah. Even that basic thing is something that a lot of people in my industry just go, what would it be like to have
Mhm.
that? A job where, unless I do something and I'm fired, or there's some sort
Mhm.
of organizational mashup in which I'm let go, which obviously is a thing that can happen. Like, to just know, like, where are you going to be a year
Mhm.
from now? Well, that's sitting at this desk doing this thing, getting that same paycheck, and maybe hopefully a little bit more to pay the bills for this and that kind of thing. And knowing that you don't have that. But I mean, these are choices I made. Like, I'm not
Right,
I'm
right,
not
right.
trying to, like,
Mhm.
say that, like, I'm owed this thing or something like that. I made these choices to be in this industry and to do this. But it would be nice if there was, as we talked about, a certain safety net undergirding you, me,
Mhm.
everybody,
A
so that
baseline. Mhm.
regardless of what we did and where we worked, there's a baseline foundation that said, yeah, you may fall, but you're not going to fall
Mhm.
far, or you're not going to be falling on concrete.
Mhm.
It's going to be soft, or something like that. Like, or you may fall, but we've instantly got something here to help pick you up and dust you off and get you going back up again. And you just don't
No.
have that.
Yeah, that's sad.
And I say, I am, I'm a Gen Xer who is very sympathetic to, and frankly inspired by, a lot of millennial and Gen Z activism, because they're recognizing they're coming into a world with so many problems already, and they're saddled with so much shit already. And I have, having kind of experienced a lot of that throughout my own life, I'm very sympathetic to that, even though I'm,
Mhm.
older than you. A lot of the things that I see you talking about on TikTok, I'm like, I get that. Like, I definitely don't identify with the boomers. I definitely much more identify with the younger generations. And it's actually, frankly, creating a lot of activism and action and participation in younger generations, less of an
Mhm.
apathy, which is the one constantly thrown my way, my generation's way. There's not a lot of
Mhm.
apathy. I see a lot of people who are engaged, younger people who are absolutely engaged, whether it's economics or gun control or
Mhm.
whatever, climate change. They're passionate about these things. They have to
Yep.
be, because they're instantly setting off and they're recognizing that everything beneath their feet is not stable. And if they're not passionate about changing that, it's just going to get worse. And they recognize that. And so, unlike some people as they age and they're like, oh, kids these days, and oh, in my day, and these new kids. Well, I'm excited about the new
Mhm.
kids. I'm excited about the younger generations. I mean, I'm seeing just activated people who are inspiring, and I love it. Bring it on, kids. Not that you guys are
No, no,
kids,
no.
but
But it's
bring it
so
up.
refreshing to hear because, like, obviously, I harp on the boomers all the time, and every once in a while, not every once in a while, a lot, I get boomers and older Xers in the comments, and they're like, "Yeah, fuck my generation. I'm happy to see what the younger people are doing," and it's like,
Right,
that's all you need is
right.
that little bit of alliance that hey, just stop gaslighting us into everything that's wrong in the world is our faults that your generations handed us, and just be like, yeah, maybe we can't help you fix it in any meaningful way, but if we're just not telling you that it's your fault and kicking you while you're down, it makes all the difference in the world. And I think that it's really important, and it's something that I try to keep in mind when it comes to the younger generations. Because now I'm no longer the younger generation and haven't been for a little while, and it's a weird adjustment to make, but. I try to make sure that I'm like, you know what? Fuck yeah, Gen Z's doing awesome. I believe it. I believe it. But no, just trying to make sure that we support them and be like, you know what, anything that we can do to help you change the world and be better for what we wish we had when we were your age, hopefully we can still do that. But
That's my biggest.
And not to change the no, go no ahead. Sorry, I've
That's
interrupted you multiple
I
times.
know there's
You
a
go.
lag. Is That's why I'm such a huge proponent for TikTok is
Mhm,
because I think it's been revolutionary for Gen Z and millennials and
mhm,
just our United States society as a whole. I don't know why it had to be TikTok that allowed you know this sort of just grassroots movement of just like everything happening and allowing people to see and other people's perspectives and the stuff that's actually happening, before the news is
mhm,
reporting on it, and just like showing like there are a lot of people out there who care about, our world and our country and all of its
mhm.
citizens, not just the rich people living in it. And it's like it's weird that it took TikTok to bring that out in people because social media obviously has been around for a long time. But it, that's on that point alone, I will say I don't care if China is harvesting our data.
Right.
I just don't
Everybody
care.
else is too. Like, let him have it at this point.
Right.
If only we had not given Tom the cold shoulder, and we still had MySpace. Like,
Yeah.
what the world would be today.
Exactly.
I can still see Tom's little
Yep.
profile
Man, he was always your
picture.
friend, no matter what. He was your first friend.
Always my friend. You're always my
Oh,
first
I
friend.
miss those days. You were saying something before, the lag got you and Taylor.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, it's one of the things, and not to change the subject, or not to change the point or anything, but like, as someone who went from someone who was a devoutly religious person to someone who is no longer, the recognition of, I don't believe, I used to believe, and I used to excuse a lot of things that were going on because I was like, hey, this is temporary. This is a very tiny little bit of our eternal
Mm-hmm.
lives, and then everything gets better in the future, and we can tolerate certain things or whatever. I don't believe that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe there's anything after when I die. I stop, full stop. I believe, and that means that I need to do everything within my power right here, right now, to make my life as good as I possibly can, and to make the lives of everyone around me, within my power, everything within my power, to make their life as good as it possibly can. Because this is it. You got one life, and it goes by like this. I'm already 50, and that happened overnight. And the recognition that it's here, it's now. Do everything you can to both stop those who are doing evil and uplift those who are doing good, and protect, and it's changed my entire perspective of how and why we should do everything humanly possible to make sure that all of us can have the single best possible chance at happiness, because life is messy and it is short, and you don't know what's going to happen later this afternoon, and so do everything you can to make life as good for as many people as humanly possible, and don't fight against that. Remove this mindset, this political mindset of like, why. I understand we can have debates as to how we pay for things and whatnot, and we can and should have those debates. But the fact that there's this knee jerk reaction within conservatism these days of, I don't want a world in which my life is made better and safer and healthier, is a ridiculous is ridiculous on its that stance is preposterous.
And isn't it just the craziest thing
But
growing
it
up
is
that like that's
what it
that's
is.
how I would have described what Jesus would envision
Mm-hmm.
for Christians. And
Yeah,
and
right?
the Christian conservatives are they just don't see it that way. And
Hey, white Republican gun-toting Jesus hates the Mexicans and the gays. It's right there in the Bible we've never read. So
I mean, I don't want to take away, but this is a very
Pretty
positive
convinced that if
note.
Jesus
But
Christ is an actual person,
right,
no,
he would not. Jesus Christ would not recognize modern
no,
Christianity
not at all. And I
at
think
all.
I think that those are incredible words of wisdom to live by, and I hope that some people take something away from that. And I think that I couldn't agree with you more. You haven't said much when we've talked that I've had quarrel or issue with, and I appreciate you still being my friend and kind of remaining involved in my life where we can talk and have these discussions, because I've gotten a lot out of it, and I feel like I've learned a lot from you. And yeah, I appreciate you having around.
Thank you.
yeah, and obviously we appreciate you coming
Same.
on the show. You're certainly invited to come back whenever. If you ever just wanna just chat for an hour, we're
Mhm.
happy to jump on whenever. I think we could have a super interesting discussion about pretty much any topic. Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate you coming on.
Oh.
Happy to do it, guys.
Was
Thank you so
there
much.
anything you wanted to leave us on? Any projects you got coming up that you want people to check out? And um, you already gave us your words of wisdom, so we won't ask about
I
that again.
Ironically, I just wrapped up a job a week and a half ago, and so I'm entering this scary thing, this scary market right now. But just a few minutes before I got on with you, I had an interview and have a new
Oh,
job. So can't talk
congratulations!
about it, but it's given everything that's going on, that was a very very edifying. I'm feeling very good
Oh,
today.
that's
I'm not having to worry about getting a normal job today.
Right. Well,
that,
good. Glad we can keep you where you belong. It seems like.
that's incredible. Well,
Yeah.
again, thank you so much for coming on. If you don't already follow Brandon on TikTok, you should. He hasn't posted in a little while, but he promised us he's getting back to it. It's Stay Curious, my friends.
Coming back.
Is
Coming
it?
back.
It's just at Stay Curious, my friends, right?
Yep. Stay curious,
And
my friends. Yep.
are you on any of the others? I guess I don't know if you do the same thing on Instagram. Or I know you.
I I I have started posting. I've started putting them on
Mhm.
YouTube and on Instagram. I don't do any sort of upkeep with
Mhm.
those. It was less of a trying to get it more eyes on it and more of if TikTok's
Yeah.
going to be removed, I want to be able to have some of
Mhm.
these things in a
No,
backup sort of thing. So that's kind of the way
makes
it
total
is.
sense.
But they're
Mhm.
there, but I haven't been interacting with
So
them at all. TikTok has kind of been the main
Stay
repository.
curious, my friends. On
I don't have. It's the time
yeah.
thing. It's the time thing, Jordan.
You have a time machine or something, because I don't know how you find all the time for the stuff you already do. But at Stay Curious, my friends, on TikTok, Wiki Surfer podcast. I
Wiki Surfer, which we're trying to bring back. We're in talks right now with several production companies to bring back. So fingers crossed, because I really
and
want to
it's
get
a
back to
really
that.
high production podcast. It makes ours look, well, ours is amateur hour, but it definitely makes ours look like amateur hour. It's got sound effects and everything. It's a real mental movie when you listen to it. So I highly suggest you go. There's
Movie.
plenty of content there to catch up on while they're figuring out how to get that rebooted. And yeah, once again, just thank you so much for coming on. Career's kind of peaked here now, being be a guest on our show. So it's all downhill from here.
It's all downhill
Sorry
from
about
here.
that.
But no, again, I always appreciate you. And we will talk soon. We hope to have you back on again.
Thanks, sir.
All
My
right.
pleasure.
Thanks
I'll do it.
everybody for listening. And we will see
Bye,
you
guys.
next week.